What is an MMORPG? That sounds like a pretty simple question. It's an acronym for a genre of games, but what do games within that genre actually have in common which causes them to all be lumped together? What do they all do? What are the design conventions which make up an MMORPG game and make someone go, ah yes, this is undeniably an MMORPG? How can you look at games like Old School RuneScape, EVE Online, Furcadia, and Final Fantasy XIV and say, yes, these clearly all belong to the same genre. Anyone who enjoys one will likely enjoy the others. There are YouTubers and Twitch streamers dedicated to the genre as a whole, or to games within the genre. There are subreddits and forums and news agencies dedicated to the MMORPG, so you'd assume we'd all have a collective, finalized definition for what this genre actually is. But no, while we agree on the broad strokes of design, almost no one agrees on the specifics. But why? What makes this genre so hard to define? Let's discuss. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube who keep this channel alive. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. Welcome, I'm Josh Strifehaze. I've been making MMORPG videos on YouTube and playing them on Twitch for several years, from complete playthroughs to comedy reviews to interviews with the people who make these games. Now, I'm far from the only YouTuber working in this space, but the MMORPG genre is still relatively niche within the greater gaming community, so there are far fewer MMO creators than, say, Minecraft or first-person shooter creators. Now, being part of a smaller community, you'd think we'd all be able to agree on what this genre actually is, but even between creators or communities themselves, there is disagreement. Whenever a new game is announced and proclaims itself an MMORPG, you'll have groups of people saying, yes, this is definitely an MMO, while other people say, well, actually, it doesn't meet the criteria to be classed as an MMORPG. But what are those criteria? Why is this so vague? Well, I think I can answer this, and it mostly boils down to how bad the acronym MMORPG is for telling you anything mechanical about the genre itself, or a game described by the acronym. So let's explore acronyms, information density, and societal expectations of games. MMORPG stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. The acronym was likely popularized by Richard Garriott, the guy who created the Ultima series of role-playing games and then Ultima Online, one of the first successful online adventure games. It's generally used to describe always online adventure games where players interact in a consistent online world, playing a character and being responsible for making choices which progress the account they are playing. But most of the information and opinions you have about the genre when you hear the acronym MMORPG will be formed from connected memories or experiences within the games themselves, not this acronym on its own. Because the acronym actually explains very little, and the few things it does explain are vague, and this can get complicated, so we need to look at how we use language to communicate and pass information on. So let's break this down. In maths, there's a thing called set theory. Now don't worry, this isn't a maths lesson and there won't be a test. You just need to understand this basic idea. A set is a collection of things which all belong to that set. So if I say video games as a set, literally every video game ever made would be included in that set. The first Mario game would be there, Doom, The Sims, World of Warcraft, Soul Reaver, FIFA, Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball, the KFC dating simulator. Every video game ever made is in this set. So if you were to say to someone, oh, I love video games, you're effectively saying you love every single game within the set of all games ever, which includes Devil May Cry 2, and this is clearly a lie because nobody loves Devil May Cry 2. So instead of saying you love all video games, you need to add in parameters of the set you're actually talking about, descriptors which narrow down the field and exclude certain games and include others. And the more descriptors you add, the smaller and more specific the set you're talking about becomes. For example, if you say you love first-person games, you've narrowed the set down to only games with a specific camera angle. But even now, the range of games within that set is quite varied. Portal, Doom, Myst, GoldenEye, Castle Master, Morrowind if you only play zoomed in. You've only really defined a camera angle. So you add in more descriptors and narrow down the set even more. You love fast-paced, first-person arena shooters with online or local area network capture the flag modes. Cool, that's a load more parameters. The set you're talking about is now a lot more defined. You could enjoy Unreal Tournament, or Halo, or Doom. Now you could reduce that set even more by adding in even more specific things, but eventually you'll kind of accept that you've reduced it enough and almost all the games within the set you've now got are probably probably going to be something you enjoy. The problem with this is human beings are lazy, and the set of games is huge, and refining them down is quite hard work, so we take general design tropes or common design choices and we create acronyms for them, so we can lump all those design choices into an easy-to-define set. Instead of saying, oh, I like the design style where the camera is placed where the protagonist's eye would be and then they shoot things, we just say first-person shooter, shortened to FPS. Instead of saying, oh, I like strategy games where both me and my opponent construct a base and send units at each other at the same time, we say real-time strategy, shortened to RTS. Some people prefer the real-time aspect to be turn-based, so turn-based RTS is also a thing. Take the refining description of 4-player split-screen couch co-op. You've refined it to a potential amount of players and then added in how you like to play the game, in the same room as other people, likely all using the same console on the same screen. Now here's the issue, and don't worry, we'll be bringing this back round to the MMORPG acronym soon. This is going somewhere, trust me. When you use an acronym or a descriptor to reduce the set of all games to only the set of games you actually like or want to talk about, you want to be as specific as possible. Ideally, you want to increase the density of information contained within an acronym. You want to say a lot of stuff without saying a lot of things, and this is usually done best by excluding or including mechanical or gameplay choices, things which actually matter to the moment-to-moment experience of the game. You don't really want to use superficial or aesthetic descriptions. It's useful to define sets by how they play and not how they look. Because if you did use a superficial parameter to create a set of games, like saying, oh, I like games set in the modern world, you're still grouping together games like FIFA, Broken Sword, The Sims, The Secret World, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Tekken, and Burnout 3. Yes, you've definitely removed some games with this parameter, but you've not really created a group which shares any gameplay similarities. So if creating aesthetic sets isn't a great way to group together similar playing games, we could instead do it mechanically, with things like camera angles, control schemes, single player or multiplayer. And remember, the more specific information you refine a set by, the more cohesive and similar the set will feel. And then the more likely you are to have a bunch of games within the set that you'll enjoy because they meet most of your criteria. So how does Steam, the online gaming platform, do it? Well, there's a drop-down menu in the Steam store, and the first genre is action, which itself is a massive set, so they refine it further into focused groups within action, like arcade and rhythm, fighting and martial arts, first-person shooter, hack and slash, and more. You can see there's also the role-playing category, but this itself is broken down into action RPG, adventure RPG, JRPG, and more. When you use an acronym or a genre descriptor, what you're trying to do is reduce the set of all video games into a specific set of games, and you're trying to do it as efficiently as possible. So if you say third-person shooter, you still have a lot of games remaining, but if you clarify down to story-driven, cover-based, modern adventure, male protagonist third-person shooter, you're probably talking about Uncharted. So what does all this have to do with MMORPG being a bad acronym for creating a set? Well, let's take the other examples we've used so far and see how effective they are, mechanically, at creating specific sets. First-person shooter. You have a defined camera angle, first person. This is objective, and then a defined gameplay element, shooting. Now, you could still be on about either Portal or Doom, but we have defined mechanics at least. RTS, real-time strategy. You've got a gameplay mechanic of playing against the other person at the same pace with real time, and then an overall feeling of tactical mastery with strategy. VN, or visual novel. You know you're likely going to get a story-based experience told through static images with text over them, likely with a couple of choices to make along the way focused on the outcome. These acronyms and descriptors are really efficient at making sets of video games because they contain one or more mechanical parameters and one or more gameplay mechanics. It's also super important to understand the order of descriptors actually changes the weighting and importance a person will give them, because games can contain small elements of certain designs without that being the focus of the game. When we, as humans, hear descriptors of anything, we generally give the first piece of information we hear more importance and more weight in the final outcome than the second, third, or fourth piece of information. For example, if I say, I want a driving game with combat, I'm going to be prioritizing the driving element but enjoy the addition of combat. So a game like Burnout 3 would work well. It's a driving game first, but you can crash into people. If I were to say, however, I want a combat game with driving, I'd probably lean more towards something like Twisted Metal, which puts the combat first, you just happen to be in cars. So the order of descriptors or the order of the acronym does play a role in our own understanding of what we're looking to prioritize in a game or a set of games that we create. And now we come to MMORPG. Massively multiplayer online role-playing game. The first M, massively, is our first stumbling block. How massive is massive? Unlike a defined descriptor such as 2-player or 24-person game, massive is vague, and multiplayer simply means more than one. It may not even mean everyone at the same time. Old school RuneScape has servers which can hold 2,000 people total, but they have multiple servers, meaning while everyone is playing the same game, they're not always playing or interacting with everyone else playing the game. The Elder Scrolls Online has its mega server, so while everyone is technically on the same server, provided you're in the same region, you may phase in or out of someone else's game based on server load. Is that multiplayer? Genvanard only has 2 servers, but each has a very limited capacity. Could that be considered massive? Imagine taking just the massively multiplayer bit and trying to make a set of massively multiplayer games from every game ever without a defined number for massively. It basically comes down to personal interpretation. If 20 is massive, then Unreal Tournament gets in. If 100 is massive, then Fortnite gets in. If you start saying massive is a minimum of 5,000 all able to interact at once, then old school RuneScape doesn't get in. It's vague, and a set made with vague parameters will differ from person to person. But how about the online bit? I mean, that's pretty objective. It's either online or it's not. But nowadays, many new PC games or console games have to be online all the time, even if they're single-player experiences. Like StarCraft 2 or Diablo 3, even Mad Max launched requiring a constant internet connection to be played. So the set of games which must be online is strongly defined, yes, but those games may not have any connection to each other. Just because you like one game that's always online doesn't mean you'll like another. And remember, the point of creating sets is to find similar games so you can find things that you enjoy. So what about the final bit of the acronym, the RPG bit? Surely this narrows it down enough to be a cohesive set. Well, again, not really, because the overarching genre descriptor RPG is extremely broad and itself contains many varied games. Roleplay could mean, taken literally, any game where you play a role within a story, such as any of the Grand Theft Autos. But as a gaming collective, we've all come to accept it generally means a game where you have control and input over your avatar's progression and some level of authority over guiding how your character develops, usually making choices which improve or specialize as the game goes on. But even with that more specific focus, Devil May Cry could still be classified as an RPG, along with Dark Souls and Final Fantasy VII, Baldur's Gate, Borderlands, Mass Effect, Hades. And these games are all different camera angles, progression styles, and gameplay styles, and yet all class themselves as RPGs. So we've known for ages that the acronym RPG itself isn't really enough to create a defined set of games with any design through line. This is why Steam has 7 different subcategories for RPG alone. So now we can look at why the acronym MMORPG sucks for creating anything even close to a cohesive set. Massively isn't defined and is open to interpretation. Multiplayer could be anything from 2 to 2 million. Online doesn't tell us anything about the gameplay beyond the networking fact that we need internet, and RPG is itself such a broad acronym, it needs to be refined down multiple times before we even start to see a consistent looking group of games. MMORPG as an acronym tells us nothing about camera angles, mechanics, or aesthetics. It doesn't tell us if the game world is fully open or instanced, player versus environment focused or player versus player focused, hack and slash or slow and tactical, sci-fi or fantasy, WASD movement or click and wait, PC, console, or mobile. I mean, Lord of the Rings Online is a third-person WASD movement fantasy tab-target adventure with a consistent open-world landmass. You can literally walk from the Shire to Mordor in the game, remaining in the same overworld, while Albion Online is a top-down click-to-move sandbox crafting PvP game with smaller instanced zones connected via waygates on the edge of each self-contained map. And both of them are MMORPGs, which is a perfect example that when you refine the set of all games into only the set of massively multiplayer online role-playing games, you are still left with a huge variety of games. When taken literally, it does basically mean a game which has multiple people playing together and you as a player have a level of agency over the progression of your account or in-game avatar, which is so broad there's no chance of any level of cohesion between its members. And I know that taking the acronym literally is pedantic, but that's exactly what people who don't have experience with this genre are going to do. And if you don't take it literally, but instead wrap your own interpretation of what MMORPG means to you around the acronym, you're going to run into the obvious issue of how your subjective interpretation of what an MMORPG should or needs to be may not be the same as everyone else's. First person is objective, a camera angle, we cannot deny that. Third person is objective, turn-based is objective, two-player is objective. Massively multiplayer online role-playing game is unfortunately mostly subjective, and therein lies the issue of defining it. This also ties back to the order of acronyms having importance to us as humans. World of Warcraft has been described as an MMORPG, placing emphasis on the multiplayer elements first and the personal RPG adventure second, while Final Fantasy XIV is often described as an RPG MMO, with the personal RPG adventure taking priority, and it also happens to be online with other people. In Nerd Slayer's video, Why Final Fantasy XIV isn't an MMORPG, it's an MORPG, the exclusion of the first M of the acronym, the massively bit, reframes the game as a smaller-scaled multiplayer online role-playing game. Other people just happen to be there, because you simply don't need to interact with everyone. It's never massive by requirement. While Guild Wars 2 describes itself as an MMORPG, Guild Wars 1 refers to itself simply as an online RPG, because while it does have multiplayer elements, you'll only see other players in the central hub zones or your party in the wilds if you invite them with you. So when a game describes itself as an MMORPG, all it's really saying is it fits into a really large set of games that you can play with other people, and there's an element of progression. EVE is an MMORPG, as is Old School RuneScape, as is Final Fantasy XIV, despite the fact they've all got different camera angles and mechanics and aesthetics and gameplay focuses, and unfortunately, what the general gaming public doesn't really understand, and this goes for Steam as well, because Steam only has MMORPG as its own set, the acronym MMORPG, much like the vague descriptors driving game, sports game, shooter game, or the overall term video game itself, needs to be refined a lot more before you can create a set of games with much mechanically in common. So what is an MMORPG? It's a game of almost any mechanical system or artistic style which falls somewhere within this rather ill-defined broad set of networking and progression parameters. And liking a game within this set isn't any indicator at all that you'd like any of the others, because there are so many. So the next time a new game is announced which describes itself as an MMORPG and people scream that's not a real MMORPG, much like the no true Scotsman fallacy, remember that the game might indeed fall within the set of MMORPGs, but it might not be the specific part of that set that those people or you enjoy. And that's fine. But I know that it's not fun to leave a video on a negative note, so we can all just agree that an MMORPG is an online game that has fishing. As always, cheers for watching. Another massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube who keep this channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, and our Discord. And as always, have a great day.